Welcome to the Atom CTO podcast. My name is Bhairav Patel. I am here with my co-founder, Sam Noble. Say hello, Sam.
Hello.
And this is part of the demystifying series that we're running at the moment. So the first one that we've done is demystifying blockchain. And today we're going to demystify hiring of a tech team. So we at Atom CTO are often asked to hire or help in the process of hiring tech teams. And I think it's important that we kind of give a little bit share our experiences, give a little bit of our knowledge, but also to kind of walk through the process and kind of set expectations of hiring a tech team and what you should really be looking for. So, Sam, I guess what we should do initially is talk a little bit about our own experiences of hiring. So do you want to go first and talk a little bit about the kind of teams that you've hired internally? And I guess we will be talking about outsourcing at a different juncture. But we can mention it here because essentially, you're still hiring a team.
Yeah, sounds good to me. So I guess I was very fortunate, very lucky that, even from my very first job fresh out of university, I was involved in some of the kind of interviews and building that team. I think I was the first or second hire for a new project, this team. And then after a year or so of working with that team, and because we were working with very new technologies, we were all involved in the rest of that hiring experience. So that gave me some really great exposure from very early on, and to work alongside and be in those interviews with other people who were just, fantastic at doing this. I felt like I learned a lot from a very early age. And this is working with hiring people locally as well as remotely. So, for both of us, we've worked with global companies where not everybody sits in the same office, not everybody sits in the same country. So you're not only dealing with people remotely, but also different cultures, different languages, all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I've done a lot of hiring over the last 10, 12 years when it comes to being CTO of companies. When I was in Norway, obviously, for Nethandelen, it was a large e-commerce business, and I built the team there. We started off with, I think, 4 developers. Well, we actually started with 8, then fired 4, and then rebuilt that team from scratch and ended up having, I think, 16 internal. Was it 12 internal and another actually 5 or 6 external. So we actually had full development. We had developers in New Zealand, the US, India, and Norway at the same time. So that was great, 24/7 development. And then obviously with Aztec, the fintech before all fintechs, we built that team over a number of years, which obviously included yourself, but building up operations in Portugal and the actual IT operations team in America, and obviously business analysis and testing in Dublin.
And you built the team in India originally, I think.
Yes, we had the teams in India. So I mean, obviously, again, don't really want to go too much into the outsourcing bit, though of course we'll touch it, but essentially the principles are generally the same, and you should really follow, I think in many ways you should follow the same processes when bringing any kind of developer onto the team. So I guess let's start with the actual hiring process. Now, what have you found works the best when you're actually looking to hire a developer? Now, what kind of process do you go through when you're hiring a team?
A very long, hard, difficult process. It's tricky. I mean, hiring is difficult, right? You really want to make sure you get the right person. Again, depending on the jurisdiction you're working in, the laws are very different. So in some countries, like when we were working in Norway, once you've hired someone and they've gotten through that probation period, you're effectively stuck with them. It's very difficult. So you have to make sure they're a really good fit. So, and then in the US, it's kind of almost a complete opposite, where you can just let someone go straight away. So the whole ethos of hire slow, fire fast, I guess, is what comes into a lot of this. So it's a funnel, right? It's a bit like a sales funnel where you have a few small positions to fill. Could be 10, could be 20, 30, 40, 50, but there's a wealth of people out there. So you need to narrow those down at each stage. And if you're involved in that entire process, it can be extremely time consuming. I mean, we've both sat there with a stack of CVs in your inbox or on your desk to look through, and it's just that initial filter of getting through hundreds of CVs.
So that's the interesting starting point, right? So obviously it starts with the CV. So, what do you look for in a CV? And I'll talk a bit after you've talked about it. I can talk a little bit about what I look for. So when you're looking at a CV, what kind of things stand out for you?
Yeah, and this is a really it's a great point, because that's the kind of the starting point, right? Is the CV. So for me, generally, I just look for someone who's interesting. If you've worked on some cool projects, you know, not necessarily an enterprise, and again, this will vary slightly on the role that you're filling. If you're looking for a junior developer versus a CTO, they're two very different things. But generally, you want to see some cool, exciting stuff. And I know, as a techie myself, as a developer, we're generally pretty bad at selling ourselves and talking about all of the great things we do. But that's probably the key. I don't care so much about, your academic qualifications. You might have been the brightest kid in your degree and graduated top of the class, but if you don't fit in with the team, if there's not that kind of good social fit, then you might not necessarily be the right person for the job. So less about the kind of the boring certifications and academics, and more about what's some cool, funky stuff that you've done.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something quite interesting there, hiring a junior developer versus hiring a CTO. I agree in that obviously you're looking at different things, but I think, we've interviewed both, right? We've interviewed juniors and seniors and CTOs. And I think for me, what I find very frustrating is firstly that, IT people seem to be the worst at writing CVs. It's just either it's full of acronyms and SQL and MySQL and, whatever it is, React, all the languages, so they just plaster them down onto a CV and just expect us to understand, what they've done with that. Or they just talk about a project in a very generic manner and they don't really say anything about what they've done or what they've achieved. And I think for me, no matter whether you're hiring a CTO or a junior developer, it's what are your accomplishments and what have been your challenges and how have you overcome them. And you can easily put that into a CV. And I think one of the issues, or the kind of little, what's the word? Not grudges, but one of the kind of, one of the things I kind of dislike a lot is that whole ethos of you need to have a 1-page CV, because that doesn't tell me anything, right? And if I've got, and typically with these kind of jobs, you've got hundreds of people applying, and if I've got 100 people who are all giving me a single piece of paper with just names and acronyms, then I can't tell anything. And if you can actually put down, this is the project, this is the actual overall project, and this is what I did and what I achieved within that project and how I did it, that's way more valuable, and that lets us understand that what you were part of, the bigger project, but you also knew what your contribution was. And I think that's what's missing from pretty much every CV. And just to kind of tell listeners, I've hired in Norway, India, Bangkok, US, let's say most of Europe, and even in a bit in South America. So I've seen global sets of CVs, and pretty much all the same. They're all terrible. And I think anyone who's listening and wants to understand how to catch our attention is to say, what have I done? What am I actually doing on the side, which is different? And, what have I really achieved? And what challenges have I faced that, I've overcome, and how did I do that? Obviously, we can get that stuff that we can get into more in an interview. And the worst thing is to come up with someone who's got like a CV that is very generic, very bland, and just talks about technologies they've used. I mean, we can't really ask you any questions off the back of that, which aren't, again, then very generic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we need that executive summary. Here's, what I've been up to. And as you say, stuff outside of work as well. And work is generally pretty boring, depending on the company you're working in. You're probably just doing pretty boring stuff. What are you doing outside of work? What is your GitHub username? Don't put your photograph on there. I don't care what you look like. Save that space for your GitHub username. Put that on instead.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a CV the other day where the guy listed all of the apps that he's created and launched into the Apple App Store, which is awesome, because that is immediately I go and have a look, and you can see the kinds of apps he's developed, what the ratings they have, even download a couple just to say, have a play around with them and see. Now that is perfect, because that's someone's showing you what they've done, and these were all side projects, which immediately gives you some kind of confidence that this person, okay, may not have all the bells and whistles, may not be working fully to all standards and processes, but they've got that passion. And so you can drive them and learn them, teach them the ways that you work, and you can build, and there's someone you can, there's malleable enough that you can actually mold into the developer that you want them to be.
Definitely. And you touched on it as well, where you say, kind of give us some facts or some figures about an impact or something you've done, which, shows us that you have a bit more awareness of things outside of that project. Again, this is probably a little bit more senior roles, but, you increased performance or throughput by 20%. Yeah, that's really interesting for us.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's, again, one of the things that no one ever does, right? I mean, I know that I did a project as a contractor for Telenor, and I saved them millions and millions of kroners, right? Now, obviously that that's something I put onto the CV simply because it's an achievement, right? One thing that I did saved them X million a month. And that's the kind of stuff that you want to know, right? Because it gives us who's interviewing you the confidence that you understand what it is you're doing, and you're not just a small cog in a large wheel, if that makes sense. Is that the right analogy? But you know what I mean? Where you're a bit player, not understanding what your bit does in the wider whole.
That's it. And it comes down to that. Imagine, this person who's reviewing these CVs, there's thousands of them, hundreds of them that they're sifting through. So you just need these kind of small little bits that make you stand out above everybody else. And I think one of my biggest pet peeves is, as you mentioned, filling a CV full of acronyms of technologies you've worked on. And then when you get to that interview stage, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, you find out that they actually haven't worked with any of these technologies. They were in a team that was using that technology. So, somebody writes that they have SQL development. Oh, no, I worked on a team and the guy sitting next to me had SQL development. So actually you haven't written any SQL yourself. Don't include that on the CV. If you can't talk about it in an interview or ask questions about it, I don't think it should be on your CV.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, we can talk a little bit about the interview process. I guess rather than us going through the kind of processes that we would follow in that sense, I mean, it's fairly straightforward, right? We would have a normal conversation. It wouldn't necessarily be people like us, but it would be someone in our team or someone else who's working within the organization to have a quick, short 15-20 minute conversation with a person just to understand that they can communicate and can describe the things that they've been doing. And often most people fail at this hurdle, right? Where they're unable to talk about themselves and what they've been doing. And then the next thing we usually do is as a test. If we feel that they've got that ability to kind of communicate and they've got a fit, we would give them a technical test. Now, I guess the tests that you and I have given out, some have kind of varied in size in the sense that some of the people have taken half a day or 2 hours to do something, and other people have taken like a week to do the same test. But I guess in that sense, it's not something where we worry about how long it's taken. It's what the end result is, right?
That's it. Yeah. And I think, for a lot of these things, we purposefully leave it open where you could do it in 2 hours or you could do it in 10 days. And really it's just to gauge how you approach that. So, if you only spend 2 hours on it, because again, we understand, people have lives outside of work. You can't really sit and do this all weekend. If you have a family at home, it's not so easy. But it's how you approach the problem. So maybe you just look at the spec or the challenge we give, and you might not even write any code, but you could write a 2-page document about how you would solve it. And when you come into that interview and we discuss it, that's where the real value comes from. So it's just giving us something to work with is the thing.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, after that, we then do a more technical, in-depth conversation where there'll be someone who's an expert in the field of whatever it is that you're being asked to do, and they'll ask you some more kind of searching questions. And then after that, usually it's a conversation with someone like myself who would then really get at I guess where I would be interviewing them, or the reasons I would be interviewing them is just to understand, will they fit within the team? Will they be someone who's open to working in the style that we would work? Because I think, okay, from an Atom perspective, we work very differently from most companies. We have a very different set of standards from what I've seen out there, and we not only work quickly, but we have a very good high standard, and there's a very low failure rate in what we do. So we try and maintain that. And is someone else going to be able to keep that pace up and keep that quality up? And I think those are questions that I'm not going to share now, but those are the questions we ask, and we try and gather that information from them. I don't know about what you kind of asked for in your final interviews.
Yeah, so it's that protecting the kind of the brand and our image, and the I forgot the word I was going to say. Making sure that there's that kind of good cultural fit that we're going to work together, which, similar to before, you could be an absolute rock star, and I hate the word, a rock star developer, but if you can't work with the team, then, how conducive are you to the project? But I think for me, one of the most important things is that, I hate exams. Exams are a really bad way of testing someone's knowledge. It's just a good way of testing someone's ability to remember useless information. So, in all of the interviews leading up into that, it's a conversation. It's just understanding how you approach things, what things you like, what your style is. And that flows all the way through into those kind of final stages as well. It's, we're not really examining you under a microscope. It's just, is there a good fit in in all aspects, in the soft skills and the tech skills. So it's not really just one thing in particular that we look for.
Yeah, and I guess the key there is, as you allude to, we're not trying to catch people out, right? What we are trying to catch out people who are just bullshitting, but we aren't trying to catch people out and show, we're cleverer than you or we're better than you, because obviously we're not in most instances, right? But it's more about, can we work alongside you? Can you actually do what we want it is, what you want you to do? And it's not really a situation where we're trying to outfox people.
Absolutely, because ultimately, if you think about it, if you strip it all down to the kind of very bare essentials, we're all here for the same reason, right? We all want to earn a living. And the only way that we can all earn a living together is if we produce high quality work. And, that's how we can get repeat business and build on that. So if we can't all do that together, then, we're probably not a good fit for each other. And I guess it's really as simple as that.
So I guess if we kind of roll this into advice for anyone who's like in a small business looking to hire someone technical, right? They really do need to go through this methodical process. And again, looking back at some clients we've had in the past, or even teams that we've talked to in the past, they focus a lot on money, and they focus a lot on how much is it going to cost. And they don't really, yes, cost is an issue for a lot of small businesses, startups, right? But sometimes it is worth paying someone a little bit more to get that more produced from them. And I think really, I see a lot of companies focused on, how much does it cost to use a recruitment consultant? How much does it cost to pay them? Do I have to give them shares, this, that, and the other? Right? And for the right people, you should be giving this up simply because the value that they'll add to your business is huge. And I don't think you should be focused too much on the cash, because if you are focused on the cash, then you might as well go outsource everything to India, and get some, or Vietnam or whatever it is, and get some cheap developers. You're not going to get what you want. You're not going to get a great system. But you'll get it for the price you want. And I think if you want to actually invest in IT, you need to invest in that as if you'd invest in any other kind of tools and machinery for your business, right? You're not going to buy, if you are, I'm just being a bit random here, but if you own a printing press, you're not going to buy the cheapest printing press because that's going to go, belly up in a year's time. You're going to have to buy another one. So why do that with your developers?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're still battling on a daily basis. It has changed over the years. I think, in general, we're all becoming a little bit more aware that cheapest isn't always best. And the cliche of if you buy cheap, you buy twice, because you might be able to pay half the amount in an hourly wage to a developer, but it will take you twice as long, or you'll have to get someone to redo it after, or it'll be great for a POC to demo to your investors, but as the minute you want to actually take this further, you're stuck. You have to rebuild it. So whilst you are saving money initially, you're not in the long run. So you're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
I think just to temper that advice, I think we should also be stressing is that paying too much is also a problem, right? And you need to get value for money. And let's say in the UK market, it's quite hot. It's a seller's market. And I think people are very overpriced in this market, simply because from my experience of going around the world and working with developers, you're not getting, I think, the standard that we would want for the price that we would expect here in the UK. Now, obviously there are great people here. I'm not saying that there's not, but I think that there's at least 10 to 20,000 pounds extra on top of resources here in the UK. Maybe it's a cost of living thing, but I think, it's very important that people don't pay too much. And I think that's where, if you're a small business, you need to speak to people like us to understand where is the right pricing. And I think the other thing is also to understand that, most developers nowadays want to work remotely, right? They don't want to be trudging into the office every day. And unless there's a very good reason that they need to be there, in many ways you want them to be in that quiet zone, because there are so many offices I've walked into, right, where the boss goes, yeah, we've got this room of techies. It's very quiet. They don't talk to each other. And that's the nature of, the work that people do as developers. They need to be absorbed into the work that they're doing. So they won't necessarily be talking. So if they're not talking to anyone, they don't need to be in the office, right? Because again, a lot of techies will not necessarily want to get involved in the whole company spirit. I'm not saying that, everyone's antisocial or anything like that, but, they've got quite complex things to do. So leave them to do it. And then if you're not necessarily having them in the office, then I think there should be no fear of having them abroad or having them, virtually working from anywhere around the world. As long as they fulfill what they need to do and they're the right fit for your company and they actually share your vision, then there's no real reason why you need to have them sitting in front of your nose.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really just about, and our job as managers and as CTOs and whatever, it's to enable people to be as productive as possible. So, if there's a developer and she's, way more comfortable and more productive working from home, why not enable that 4 days in the week? And then you have that 1 day of the week, because again, some people, they like to have that kind of office, camaraderie, and, you really feel like a team player. And as one of my old mentors, Alan Jones, who I mentioned in the previous podcast, he coined the term, the VAN, the vocal area network, which, it's quite powerful, especially in software when you're bouncing a lot of ideas around. It's really good to have those kind of brainstorming sessions that still doesn't quite translate as well, remotely. There's nothing better than sitting together with a few people on the whiteboard, but that's not every day. I mean, that's probably a couple of days a month or at the beginning of every sprint. You sit there, you plan everything. Everybody knows what they're going to do. Now you can go off and work however you want, whatever makes you most productive. As long as there's clear, well-established lines of communication, doesn't matter where everybody is sitting.
Yeah, and I think the getting people together is really becomes important once you've got more than 3 people, I'd say.
Yeah.
In the team. If you've got 1 developer or 2 developers, then, you don't need them in front of your face. But again, we've worked like this for many years, right? And so this is what we're used to. And I think for us, it's kind of everyday bread and butter type work. And I think it's a big mind shift for people. Now, obviously with this COVID-19 thing happening, people are realizing that they can manage, remotely. But hopefully it's a lesson that people will take away. And after this crisis is over, they'll understand that actually I can still manage teams remotely and it's not such a big issue.
Definitely. It's just finding that balance.
Yeah. So, war stories. So what, do you have any interesting, I know I've got loads, any interesting interview stories, things that have happened, weirdly shocking things, disappointing things, funny things that have happened during, interview process?
Yeah, some interesting things. I have to be careful about what I say because some of them are pretty obvious. Excuse me. So one great one, this comes back to one of my very early jobs. So I was quite young in the interview process. At the end of the interview, naturally you want to turn it around because an important part of the interview process is that it's not just the company interviewing the person who is applying for the job. It should be both ways. The person who is applying for the job also needs to interview the company to make sure it's a good fit for them. So it's a very two-sided conversation. So as part of this, at some point in the interview, you want to open it up to allow the candidate to ask their own question. And typically this is aimed at the job, the role, the technologies, all of this stuff. But this one chap, he pulled out a book and he opened it to some page and said, yeah, I was reading this book on the way here. I didn't understand this. What's this about? So, okay, we're more about questions about the role or something, but this is great. There was another really great one. I think we're pretty early on into the conversation, just asking some of those early questions, getting to know each other. And the guy basically turned around. He'd already had another job offer from some other company. And he said, look, as they say in the movies, show me the money. That's your introduction to yourself. I had to get up and leave. I had to leave the room and let the other guys take over. I think that was probably I think that's the only time I've walked out of an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some, so just following up on that, there was an interview that I did out in Asia, and the guy, within the first, 10, 15 minutes of the chat, basically said, yeah, the reason I'm coming to you is because I feel that I'm being underpaid by my current employer, and I negotiated poorly. And this is a guy living in Asia, so we were living in Thailand at the time, and he was getting paid $70,000 a year, which is a huge amount of money out there. And he was getting paid $50,000 a year, and he wanted us to pay him $70,000 a year. And that was his opening gambit. And he goes, I want you to pay me more. And I'm like, well, but why? If they valued this, why are you suddenly, I undersold myself. And he actually told me that if we gave him an offer, he would go back to his company and see what their counteroffer would be. And
wow.
I was like, dude, yes, no, please leave. And then the funny thing about that guy was that he interviewed for a position with a .NET developer, really didn't he claimed to have .NET experience, but when we gave him the technical interview, he then said, no, I don't have any .NET experience. But we said, you have this for years on your CV. And again, it goes back to what we said earlier. If you've been in part of a team that's done it, then don't put it down as something you've done. But, He then, after we rejected him, he ended up calling back to the HR, complaining about us, saying that we were asking him questions that weren't relevant and that we were not, he told us that we didn't have the technical experience, so why did we ask him technical questions? When, it was all over his CV that he had that experience, and it was really quite odd. Sorry.
I was going to say, we've had that feedback before, from some of the things where the candidate has fed back to us that he felt it was very unfair and we were asking too many technical questions, which I thought was very strange when, it's a technical interview. We're not giving an examination. We're just talking about general experience. And that was the feedback, that the interview is too technical for a technical role.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I think that one of the best responses I had was, so we do this test where it's a simple test. I think you wrote it, Sam, where we ask them to build essentially a bank system where transaction. So you're able to deposit into an account and withdraw out money out of that account, and then you should maintain a balance. And essentially it's very simple. And I adapted that for a business analyst role. And I basically said, describe the processes for opening an online bank account. And pretty much 100% of people got it wrong, because everyone just assumed that you get automatically approved for a bank account. No one had any kind of contingency for what happens if you don't supply the right information, or the information's inconsistent, or if they don't meet your criteria, how do you then tell them that they don't have a bank account? No one ever thought about that. Everyone just assumed they click a few buttons and you get it. And I actually got a response back from the person one of the people that actually applied for the role, and the response was longer than their actual test submission. And in that response, they basically wrote, it was along the lines of, I was very excited to have got the ability to interview with you guys and then got the test. However, once I've got the test, I was wondering why such a big company would give such a simple test, and it then rocked my faith in that, you people don't know, essentially you don't know what you're doing. You're asking very simple things. Do you actually have the talent to take on someone like me? And it was just a very arrogant, long letter that was written with this kind of submission. And I read it thinking, wow. So then I thought, okay, she's going to obviously have killed this. And again, she got it horrendously wrong. I mean, the whole thing missed the point completely. And there was that level of arrogance that I've never kind of come across before that was just quite outstanding for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think one of the other interesting things that I found was, especially when we were in Norway and hiring out there, we had this really interesting, we were hiring a junior developer, and we were looking to bring obviously someone in locally, but we were interviewing a number of different people, and we had a lot of candidates coming from the master's degrees, and we had I think 4 or 5 candidates for masters, and one guy who just graduated but had done some real life experience, had worked in I can't remember where he'd worked, but he'd actually had some hands-on experience working for a tech company and doing some development. So instead of doing a master's, he did that for a year. And it was quite interesting to see the people who had done the masters had purely theoretical experience and wanted £20,000, £30,000 more than the guy who had practical experience and was actually giving you real life answers. And I think after that interview process, it really struck me that the key difference is that even if you've done 6 months of work anywhere, that is going to set you in far higher kind of standing as a junior developer or someone junior coming in than someone who's been out there studying for 6-7 years to get their masters and PhD, because that person, you're going to have to take another year or two to get them to understand how the real world works. Whereas this guy, he'd come straight out of uni and done some work. He already understood, how do teams work? How do you set requirements? How do you deliver? How do you do testing? All this kind of stuff, right? And that's what really struck me. It was that practical experience that people are missing.
Definitely. That speaks volumes. Practical work is invaluable. Yeah. And just, I think one last anecdote, which we were both involved in, which I think was hilarious, was, we were doing remote interviews for a company out in Asia, and we were asking the questions. I think this was the third or fourth interview we had done of the day. And after we asked the question, we heard some kind of whispering in the background, and then there's a delay and then the response. And it turned out that the guy who had been sitting in on all of these interviews, kind of, looking after the candidates, after the first 1 or 2 interviews, he'd heard the questions, heard the answers, And then he was whispering the answers to the guys as we were giving them. We figured that out. So yeah, that's a great one. Don't try and kind of get someone to tell you the answers in the middle of a live interview, because that's not going to end well.
Definitely not. All right, Sam, I think we've covered quite a lot of area here. If there's anything more that anyone who's listening to this podcast would, like help with, then obviously you can contact us. I'm Bhairav at atomcto.com. Sam is at sam@atomcto.com, or you can come to our website, or if you've listened to the podcast, there's all the details with the link that you obviously followed to get to this podcast. So thanks, Sam. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Bhairav.